I'm going to show some video of walking around the Atlantic Yards / Pacific Park, Brooklyn mega project, $5 billion. And I will start off looking at the yard and then show some of the buildings built around the yard. The yard is for the Long Island Railroad, and currently it's open air. The yard has been lowered in stages, 3 to 4 stories below ground, which I'll show you. And it is to have 6 high-rise buildings built over the yard. And so in the total project, in addition to the Barclays Arena, which seats about 18,000 people, there are going to be 15 total buildings, high-rise buildings, of which 8 are currently built, and then another 6 are to be built over the yard. Been much delayed, and then the one other high-rise building could go right at the corner of Flatbush and Atlantic Avenues in Brooklyn, which is the main intersection of Brooklyn. It's also where 4th Avenue comes in, so it's a major intersection. Last site I'm talking about is off to the left in this overall map. The Long Island Railroad is completely underground, and the trains come in underneath Atlantic Avenue and go into Atlantic Terminal, where it says there's 6 tracks, but I only saw 5, but maybe there is a 6th track. There are 3 island platforms, and the way you enter the terminal is sort of through the semicircular figure way over on the left side of the map. You come in off the street from Flatbush or from the other street that's parallel to Atlantic Avenue, and then walk down into the terminal or take an elevator. And then the trains will sit there, and then when there's too many trains to deal with, what they do is they take the trains and store them in the yard, which would be underneath where the yellow buildings are here. And they have like 8 to 10 tracks, maybe more. I didn't count them, but they're stored there during the day on weekdays only. And then they're then used for the PM peak when people are going back home to Long Island. The Long Island Railroad tracks that are underneath Atlantic Avenue, they eventually come up out of the ground further east, and they're on an elevated viaduct over Atlantic Avenue all the way out to Jamaica, Queens. The buildings you see that are not yellow, they've all been built, and the buildings on the right, B11, 12, 13, and 14, that's how they're numbered. They're the newest of the buildings generally, and then also B4 is pretty new and B15 is pretty new, and B2 was the first building that was built. And as I mentioned in the video, B2 is a modular building. I won't go into the details of how that was done. The modules were assembled nearby at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and then brought over by truck and then stacked up to build the building. And they thought that's the way it was going to go for all the buildings, especially the ones over the yard, because it was a lighter form of construction. But they had too many production problems, and they scrapped that idea, and all the buildings that have been built since B2 are conventional construction. So they're all fairly high-end buildings. The tallest building, B4, is like 70 stories tall, and the shortest of the rest of the buildings is like 15 stories tall. So in the modular building that I was mentioning, B2 is 36 stories tall. The other key aspect of what I'm showing here on the map is that originally this yard has been in existence for more than 100 years. It was originally used as a freight yard for freight trains coming in from Long Island, and the trains used the east portal to get into the yard. So that was convenient because the trains would be coming from the east and they would just be stored in the yard. Then the train yard became converted to passenger train use, and they still use the east portal. So what would happen is the trains would go into the Atlantic Terminal, and then when they wanted to store them in the yard, they went back east past the yard and then switched back and went down into the yard and were parked. The yard actually went all the way to Flatbush Avenue underneath where the Barclays Center is now, so the yard was sort of pushed to the east, and there's still plenty of room. But that was kind of inconvenient because the passenger trains would have to go back east and then switch back and then go west back down into the yard. So what they did is, what they always wanted to do was build the west portal to the yard. So that's one of the infrastructure upgrades to the project. So they built that under a very busy intersection. They had to support the traffic overhead while they were building it. But now there's this connection to the yard so that the trains, when they come out of Atlantic Terminal and they're going to be stored in the yard, they just go into the west portal and then straight into the yard. They don't have to do any more of that going past the yard and switching back and going back in. It just is a straight shot in, and then when they need them for the PM peak, they just a straight shot back into the Atlantic terminal. So it improves operations. It's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is that it's good to have a portal in the direction of where you need it in a yard. I just leave that observation. So let me show you some overall visuals before I then show you video clips walking around the yard. So here's a view of Barclays Arena. It's mostly complete in this photo. So you can see the roof is not completely finished. And the first building, the modular building, is on the right. The modular building is called B2, and the next building was B3. It's under construction. The tallest building of the project, which would be sort of just past the B in Barclays, that hasn't started yet. And then you can see the yard going off into the distance, and some of the buildings have been built just to the south of the yard, just to the right of the yard as you're looking at the picture. The street on the left going off into the distance, that's Atlantic Avenue, and then the street to the right of the arena going off at an angle towards Prospect Park, that's Flatbush Avenue. So these are the two busiest streets in Brooklyn. So here's a progress photo showing the construction, and you can see the depth of the yard. The yard was excavated in stages where the tracks moved back and forth from one side to the other, and they were reduced in number, and the final number of tracks is greater than what you see here. But you see the supportive excavation walls on the left. They've been constructed using piles and lathing and tiebacks, and then the permanent perimeter wall around the yard is under construction. You can see it there, and then right past that wall there's a temporary construction ramp made out of earth materials from the site, and they would have to build a couple of ramps. They would have to take one out and then put one in somewhere else in order to keep being able to come down into the yard during construction. So there's a lot of moving parts involved with all this, and it was a complex job that took place over half a decade to a decade. And in this picture you can see one of the new apartment buildings, the red and white building on the left, and then you can see Barclays Arena in the distance. This is looking west. So this is a construction photo of the west yard, and you can see Barclays Arena in the background, the B3 building next to it under construction. And then this shows there's two substations actually, one for AC and one for DC, because the yard is electrified, and also Long Island Railroad needed a new substation for this whole area, the end of their line that goes to Brooklyn. Their line that goes to Brooklyn is not their main line. Their main line goes into Manhattan, and it goes to two places, to Grand Central and to Penn Station. So this is like the third biggest terminal of the Long Island Railroad. It shows you what a operation it is. Busiest commuter railroad in the country. And then the MTA's sister agency, Metro North, is always right behind the Long Island. Metro North is always sort of catching up and will catch up and pass the Long Island in total ridership at some point. And this is another construction photo shot showing the perimeter wall being built along the south side of the yard. It's a long, narrow yard, and you'll see in the video that I talk about the lead track coming in from around these buildings that are on the right. These buildings on the right have since been removed. They've been demolished and removed, but the earth that they sat on is still there. They've kept that there. So you can see a Long Island Railroad train coming into the yard. It's still using the east portal. That's why it's using that curved track, and it's coming in from the east, and it'll then have to switch back and go back underneath this picture to the east and the Carlton Avenue Bridge, which is another part of the project. So you can just see how much construction is going on at one time. A lot of cement mixers down in the yard. So this is another picture showing the amount of excavation that goes on with all of these projects. This is actually a building site for a couple of high-rise buildings that are now built, but this is during the foundation work for these two middle buildings just to the south of the yard. But again, you can see the depth of the supportive excavation, SOE, same type of SOE construction with piles, lathing, and tiebacks. And the tiebacks actually go underneath Pacific Street, which runs through the middle of the project. And this is another view of those same buildings as they've come up out of the ground. ground, and they're in the middle of construction. And you can see a concrete pumper being used to bring concrete to the top floor of the building on the right. And these buildings are now complete, and they're very attractive looking buildings. And you can see a number of trains in the yard. The yard is pretty much done at this point. So you can see it has a number of storage tracks, most of which are being used in this picture, or at least 4 of the tracks being used in this picture. This is looking south from Atlantic Avenue. This picture is basically showing the buildings on the left being taller now and still under construction. The building straight down is still under construction, but it's topped out. That's B4, which is the tallest building on the project. It's like 70 stories tall, and you can see it still has a construction elevator on the right side. And this shows 3 trains stored in the yard, several other tracks available for more trains to be stored in the yard. This picture also shows supportive excavation wall, SOE wall on the left with the wood lathing, and then you see the permanent perimeter wall of the yard with rebar sticking out, and that will be connected to a platform that will be built over the yard, and the 3 buildings will be built over the platform on this end of the yard, the east end of the yard, and then you see the bridge going across the yard. There'll be 3 more high-rise buildings built past that bridge, between that bridge and the tall building in the distance. So there'll be 6 buildings still to go over the yard. The yard has not been built over. All the infrastructure work has been done. The yard train tracks have been lowered in phases, and all the electrical supply work has been done. Everything's been done, just waiting for the overbuild to start. One final point I'd like to make before we look at video clips walking around the yard is that when the tracks were put in and the yard was continuously in service during construction, they had to put in the foundation work for the future overbuild, which includes pile caps and spread footings. And so what they would have to do is take a track out of service, remove it, have enough room to form and install rebar and pour concrete for the foundation work. And they'd have to sink piles in certain locations. There's piles that have been installed throughout the yard. And then they would put the track back. And then they would do the same thing moving across the yard, take another track out of service, remove it, do the foundation work and everything. So all the foundation work for the future overbuild has been done also. Now, the developer of the project has changed at least once and will change again because the current developer, a Chinese developer by the name of Greenland out of Shanghai, they've gone bankrupt and they're trying to sell the project to another developer, and supposedly Related was most recently interested, but then they backed out for their own reasons. So the project remains open air, not covered over yet. So it is kind of a gaping hole in a very vibrant, teeming area of Brooklyn. So this is a missing puzzle piece that just needs to be filled in. So now let's look at some of the video clips. This is Atlantic Yard of the Long Island Railroad, and it's like 8:45, 9 in the morning. I'm surprised there's no trains stored here yet, but this is where the trains come in from Long Island, and then they terminate in Brooklyn, right near here, and then they're brought back into the yard during the day on weekdays. So let's go around and look at it from the south side to the right. Okay, the first Long Island Railroad train just pulled into the yard. And this is looking west. And I'll explain the project. So the yard was here before everything else was built. And what they've done is they've lowered the yard so that you can build an overbuild over it. So where you see that bridge there, between here and that bridge, between these 2 streets, when they build that platform, then they will build 3 high-rises above the yard. And then past that bridge to the next tallest building, there's another street runs right in front of that. they'll do the same thing. So there'll be another 3 high-rise buildings, and they'll all be like 30, 40, 50 stories tall with a lot of affordable housing. So that's the basic layout of the project, and I'll show you more from different angles. I couldn't show you from where, like, there's a street that runs behind where these trees are, but it's all blocked off with construction barriers still, even though nothing's really happened here in the last 4 or 5 years. So let me take you around to the other side. This is actually one of the best angles to show what I want to explain here. So you see this track coming down on the ramp? That's a lead track into the yard, and it's coming from the east, what we call the east portal, and that's where all the trains used to come into the yard. But now there's a new west portal way at the far end. I'll show you that coming up. But so this is sort of used as a backup lead track. For whatever reason, they can't use the other lead track. And then these are all storage tracks. And it's third rail, so it's all electrified. And then the lines over the track, you see those lines, those are just to the power to the yard lights. So the idea is to build over this so you won't see this anymore. It's part of a bigger project. It's the last phase of the project at Atlantic Yards, which is also known as Pacific Park. So it might get a little windy here, but part of this project was building of these 4 high-rises, and the 2 in the middle are the newest ones. They're about 4 years old. And then this is a somewhat older, 5 to 7 years old condo building. And the red building down there at the end is a 100% affordable housing rental. So since I walked around the yard, 2 trains have pulled in. So as far as environmental impact, during construction there was a lot of impact, but these tall buildings weren't here. And now that the yard is done, it's pretty quiet, but it'll get noisy again when they do more construction over the yard that all these people have to put up with. But as you just heard, there's a lot of sirens to put up with too. So this bridge over the yard was built as part of the project too, the Carlton Avenue Bridge at the midpoint of the yard. And it had to be done, according to the city, before they would allow the Barclays Arena to be opened. And so they were both finishing about the same time, and you can barely see the Barclays Arena. It's got the green roof if you look between the buildings, but we'll look at it more as we go around the rest of the project. So one thing that's different with the west yard as opposed to the east yard is, for one thing, you see all this vegetation here. There was a building there that they demolished, an older, actually 2 buildings, warehouse type buildings back from the early 1900s. And their feeling was to use this land rather than excavate it out, because they didn't need it for the yard. And so they thought to save money and keep it here. It was kind of questionable why they would do that. Why not just excavate everything and make it a totally clean site? And you can see the supportive excavation, SOE piles and tiebacks are still there. Now, tiebacks are only supposed to last 5 years, and these are well past 5 years now. So they'll probably have to address that at some point, but it keeps the overbuild of this project keeps getting pushed back as developers go out of business or try to sell the project to
to other developers. So, and the other thing that's different about the west yard as opposed to the east yard, and by the way, where you see the tracks, the track on the right is where trains will come in from Atlantic Terminal, which happens to be sort of at the far end of this red building here. There's a 6-track, 3-platform, high-level platform station for the Long Island Railroad. Under that, it's a mall now. But there's a area I'll show later on where the people enter that station. But the other thing about the west yard that's different from the east yard is there's way more ancillary things in this part of the yard. So, for example, this building right here is a crew quarters that was built. Previously, the people were in trailers off to the side, and they kind of moved around in their trailers, and then they finally have their permanent home here. And right next to the building, you can see the rebar sticking up. That's for the future overbuild, and it's coming out of what's called a crash wall that I believe the FRA made them put in. Even though the trains are moving here like 0 to 5 miles an hour, they still felt like, well, there could be a runaway train or something, and it could come off the tracks and crash into the crew quarters. So they've got this super thick reinforced concrete wall between it and the tracks. And then further over to the west, there's a ramp for all kinds of vehicles to drive down into the yard. And to the left of that are substations. I can't zoom in any further, but in that area there are substations that power the yard. And also, the Long Island Railroad, I think, needed an upgrade in this area, so it's also for the mainline tracks that run underneath Atlantic Avenue over here, the main east-west street in Brooklyn. And then further east, as you go east, it comes out of the ground and there's an elevated structure on a viaduct taking it out to Jamaica, Queens. And just as a point of information, like some of these other buildings are buildings that kind of sprung up because of what was going on at Atlantic Yards. So there's been a lot of development in this area. This is a really neat building, but it's not part of Atlantic Yards. Right next to it, right across the street on Atlantic Avenue at Vanderbilt Ave. And then this is a elevator that takes workers down to the yard level. Very rarely used, but they felt like they had to build it to make it ADA. So this is just to show the rebar in the foreground is coming out of the perimeter wall that goes around the yard. It's to be tied into the platform for the future overbuild, and then the rebar on the other side of the building here, the crew quarters, is coming out of the crash wall that I talked about before. So this is the west portal that was built as part of the project. So this is where the trains come in from the Long Island Railroad main line into the yard. So I previously showed the east portal and the lead track that came in there. Now the benefit of this west portal, which goes under a really busy intersection at Atlantic Avenue and 6th Avenue here in Brooklyn, is that trains can come directly out of the station and come directly into the yard. They don't have to go the length of the yard, and you can't see it now because of the trees, but they would have to go to the length of the yard and then switch back across traffic, and it was a slow process. So now They just come into the yard from Atlantic Terminal. So why wasn't this West Portal built originally? Well, originally, you can imagine it, this was a freight railroad yard back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, before it became a passenger train yard. And this area here that they did not excavate, that I was showing before, where there were these warehouse type buildings, the tracks would actually come up to the top floors of the buildings, and then they would proceed on in an elevated structure all the way over to like where the red brick building is in the if you recognize Brooklyn architecture, that's that tower there, that Moorish tower, is the which I can't get to focus. It's the Williamsburg Bank building, but that's, they came in and that's where they terminated. But it was a freight operation, and they would like bring cattle and stuff to the warehouses, butchering plants, and they'd take them to an upper floor, and the cut meat would come out the bottom floor. It's quite an operation. You'd have to see pictures. So I was hoping that we might see another train, Long Island Railroad train, come in, but it's like 9:15 in the morning, so the AM peak is pretty much done. They might still deadhead trains back to Jamaica, Queens, rather than put them in the yard here. But the ones that they do put in the yard, they'll sit there all day and then be used for the PM peak going home. So here you can see the back of Barclays Arena with the rust colored and the green roof. And then this is the tallest building in the project. It's like 70 stories tall. They've been all throughout that building while it was under construction, as well as this building here. And then as well as this other building right here. So there's going to be 14 buildings in all. And right now, 8 of them are built. This is another new modern apartment building that was sprung up partly as a result of all the activity going on with Atlantic Yards. So here you can see a lot of piers and to the ramp coming down into the yard for trucks and cars, and also other standalone supports that are for the future overbuild. And more over here, a lot of rebar sticking up. That means it's all for the future overbuild. Let's take one more look from the west end of the yard. And as you can see in the foreground of a lot of the pictures, there's a chain link fence that's, I have to shoot through that to be able to see the project. So it's pretty quiet, isn't it? There's only 2 trains here at 9:15 in the morning. I think there'll be more trains later on in the morning, and then it'll start to decrease again as the PM peak comes closer. I'm walking around the remaining buildings in the project. You can still see a little bit of the Barclays Arena peeking out from behind. It was all alone here, and it looked great, and then all these buildings have been built around them. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this building in the center as we walk around. It's a little windy here, but let me just shoot it from here. So this is 461 Dean Street. It's 36 stories tall, and it's the tallest modular building built in the world, with an asterisk. They don't know what the tallest modular building might be in China, but this was the first building built at that. They thought they were going to build all the buildings modular, but then the construction technology didn't really pan out. Had a lot of production problems. This is 461D, right at, this is Flatbush Avenue over here. This just shows you some of the businesses along Flatbush Avenue across from the Barclays Arena. And this space has been renovated and rebuilt, so maybe that's why it's for lease. This is a historic building. There was a sporting goods store in here when the arena was under construction, and I talked to the owner, and he just basically wanted to move to Florida, but he also felt like he didn't know how much spin-off business you'd really get from a sports arena at a sporting goods store across the street. So he sold and moved out. It's still vacant. So there's just tons of people going into some event here at the Barclays Arena on a Tuesday morning. And this is like what's called the Oculus, which is made to make the arena look iconic. It's a gathering place. It's where they have demonstrations too and stuff. And this arena seats like 18,000. And then this is the entrance to the subway that I actually came up out of. There's escalators. And if you want to get to the Long Island Railroad, you have to walk across Atlantic Avenue and into the separate terminal there. So one thing about the Barclays Arena, you never know what's going on there. They never really say in the visual message signs what it is that's happening. So I have no idea what's going on. But it's on a Tuesday morning, and they had a big crowd. The lines were stretching all the way to the subway entrance, and this subway station is the busiest in Brooklyn. So across the street here is a couple of vacant stores, been vacant for a number of years. A possible future high-rise development site, which might be the 15th tower of Atlantic Yards. That's the Williamsburg Bank building, which we're walking towards. And then looking back, everything you see looking west here is part of the Atlantic Yards project, which includes the Barclays Arena and the high-rise apartment buildings. So this is the outer edge of downtown Brooklyn with apartment buildings, brand new, last 5 years or so. I think the one on the left is like 70, 80 stories tall. And then here's the main entrance to the Long Island Railroad. So we'll go in here and I'll show you the layout at the platform level. It's at one end of a mall. So this is a skylight lit entrance to the Long Island. And it's really kind of cramped after all was said and done. So now I think this branch is just used as a shuttle between here and Jamaica, where you have to change trains to go to other lines on Long Island. We used to have, you know, the final destinations like Ronkonkoma or Port Jefferson here, but no more. It's now just a shuttle situation. This is the subway right over here. It's really a short connection between the Long Island Railroad, where it comes in right next to the 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. And then there's other lines you can connect to also here at Atlantic Terminal. So I said 6 tracks before. I think it's just 5 tracks. It's 2 island platforms, and then there's one side platform with the 5th track. Maybe there used to be 6 tracks here at one time. And here's a train waiting to go east to Jamaica, which is in Queens, and then the Long Island is east of that. Just show you a little bit more of the platform level. Not much room to wait around. just a small little sitting area. And here goes a train pulling out of the station.